not a lot, because two of Australia's biggest papers are literally stopping the presses in Tasmania. Back to sweeping chimneys for you, Timmy. The Australian Financial Review and The Age, both owned by Nine, claiming the Tassie revenue stream isn't quite worth the paper it's printed on.
It's not a decision we have taken lightly, but the rising cost of paper means it is uneconomic to print in Tasmania.
But veteran newsman, moneyman and man about town, Alan Kohler, reckons it's long overdue.
I'm pretty amazed that print newspapers have lasted this long, to be honest. The internet is here, everyone's reading stuff online.
A major blow for free press, in a state that started the free press, printing Australia's first uncensored newspaper in 1824.
I can't see print newspapers continuing for, forever. And in fact, if Gerry Harvey died, there'd be no more print newspapers immediately.
Newsprint now going the way of the Tassie tiger.
Being forced out of its natural habitat by the march of civilization.
Old school journalism's under threat, with research showing 286 Aussie newsrooms have shut down since 2019. But it's not all bad news for news. 97% of Aussies over 14 still read the news, but most of them do that online. And that's print's problem.
Journalism is robust and strong and is not in any way on the skids. It just is not going to forever be published on paper.
But as the saying goes, today's news is tomorrow's fish and chips wrapper. So all hope is not lost.
The fact that they're not being printed in physical form in Tasmania, personally I don't think is a big loss. It is older people who are reading the newspapers, so as the older people die, so will the newspapers.
So is this a sign newspapers are on the verge of extinction? And does it really matter?
So how are they going to wrap my fish and chips now?
I always feel like this idea that if it's not in print, it's not going to exist at all is like a ridiculous argument. People are still reading the news still exists. We're just digital now, we are a people that walks around with their phone in the pocket, and that's where we get all of our information. I haven't purchased a physical newspaper in I can't remember how long, but I read the news every single day.
The problem is there are studies that have shown as soon as you've got a screen, your attention span is lower, and so your ability to take in complex ideas, of which policy is often one, diminishes. And so as soon as you get more and more digital with your news, you just basically get it down to bite size, and then nothing complex gets transferred from people to people.
Correct. We're not reading the way that we used to read,
yeah,
but we are still reading something. And this is the way that the world is going. If they can't afford to print the news on paper and it's not economical and less people are reading the news that way, it's purely a business decision.
Do you think it affects the quality of journalism?
Well, ultimately, yes, in some ways, but also the idea that you've got this much space in a newspaper but you've got this much space online, ideally it should mean that there's more room to flesh out an idea, to have a more in-depth argument, because you're not limited by the amount of pages that you're going to be printing.
But I wonder if those people, percentage of people over 14 that are reading the news, are they reading more than the headline?
Of course. Listen, I know that it's like clickbait culture, I'm just saying it's not a paper going away, particularly when it's
the death of news.
It's a Melbourne paper in Tasmania. It's not the death of news. They still have newspapers.
I mean, I'm an old soul, so I love a physical newspaper. The only thing that buoyed my spirits a bit was finding out that a few years ago, Warren Buffett invested all this money in local papers over in America, and I don't know anything, but that man has done nothing but make successful business decisions. And I was like, oh, maybe he knows something that I'm too dumb to know. Anyway, guys,
I just love that you called yourself an old soul.
I think they were also waiting for a joke at the end that didn't come, because it was just genuine thought.
I'll disappoint you many more times, don't you worry.